That night, my daughter-in-law showed up at my door with my grandson. It was late cold and her hands were shaking when she handed him to me. She said she'd be back in the morning, but I saw the way she looked over her shoulder like someone was watching. Hours later, as I tucked my little boy into bed, he whispered, "Grandma, Mom said not to tell you what I saw at home, but—" His voice broke. The look in his eyes froze my blood. What he said next made me pick up the phone and call the police without thinking twice. I've lost people before, but nothing prepares you for the kind of fear that comes when a child tells you the truth adults are too afraid to say. Before I share my story, I'd love to know you are here with me and listening to me. Comment hi below or tell me where you're from. I love hearing how far my story reached. Sometimes knowing someone is there makes all the difference. Thank you. And now, let me tell you everything. If my story moves you, please subscribe to the channel. It helps me keep sharing what really happens behind closed doors. My name is Marceline Quaid, and this is what happened to me. It was past 8 when headlights swept across the wet gravel of my driveway. The autumn wind hissed through the pines outside, and by the time I opened the door, Taryn was standing there, soaked, clutching Micah's backpack like it was her lifeline. Her face looked pale in the yellow porch light, and when she spoke, her voice wavered. "Mom, I got a night shift at the distribution center. Can you keep him tonight?" She avoided my eyes, glancing over her shoulder toward the dark street. I'd seen her work overtime before, but never with that look like someone was standing right behind her in the shadows. Of course, I said, reaching for Micah. He was in his wrinkled preschool uniform, clutching Ranger, his old stuffed bear. His eyes were swollen, the kind of tired that doesn't come from missing naps. Taryn hesitated at the threshold, water dripping from her sleeves. "You don't have to come in," I asked. She shook her head, knuckles white around her car keys. "No, I have to go. Early delivery. I'll come back before breakfast." She leaned down to Micah, brushed his cheek, whispered, "Be good, sweetheart," then looked up at me, something unspoken in her eyes, half plea, half warning. Then she turned and left. I watched her figure vanish into the mist tail lights, blinking twice before the car disappeared down Silver Pine Road. Inside the cabin was warm with the faint scent of pine cleaner and soup. Micah sat on the couch TV, flashing cartoons he wasn't watching. His small fingers twisted Ranger's ear over and over. "You hungry, baby?" I asked, setting down a bowl of chicken noodles. He shook his head, still staring at the door. That silence weighed on me. After Noel, my son, his father, died last winter, our world had become a house full of echoes. Maybe this child was feeling it too. Hours slipped by quietly. At midnight, I woke to the sound of Micah whimpering in his sleep. He tossed, clutching Ranger, whispering through tears, "Don't go. Please don't go." I stroked his hair, murmured "Grandma's here, baby," and watched him calm down, though his breathing stayed uneven. I couldn't shake the unease. Something inside me said, this night wasn't just about overtime shifts or grief. Dawn broke pale and thin. I moved quietly in the kitchen, trying to bring normalcy back, scrambled eggs, toast cocoa. Micah came in, rubbing his eyes, hair sticking up, still hugging Ranger. "Did you sleep okay?" I asked. He climbed onto a chair, resting his chin on the table edge. Then he leaned close, voice small, trembling. "Grandma," he whispered, "Mom said not to tell you what I saw at home. But—" He stopped, eyes wide, darting toward the window as if afraid someone could hear. I bent down, heart thudding. "It's okay, honey. You can tell Grandma." He swallowed, hard words spilling out like broken glass. "There's a boy in our basement. He cries. He said his hands hurt." The spoon slipped from my hand, clattering onto the floor. The sound echoed through the kitchen. The milk tipped, spreading across the table like a pale stream. "What did you say?" I whispered. But Micah shrank into himself, clutching Ranger tighter. "Mom said she'll get mad if I tell," he mumbled. I pulled him into my arms, feeling his small body shake against me. "You're safe here," I murmured, even though my own hands were trembling. I didn't ask more. Instead, I reached for my phone and typed everything, every word, every detail into my notes, marking the time 6:10 a.m. I knew I'd need proof if I was wrong or if I was right. Later, a message pinged. It was from Taryn. "I'll come early tonight. Don't tell Micah sad stories." Her tone was soft but off, like a line rehearsed too many times. I read it twice, staring at the wording, "Don't tell Micah." Then I looked at Ranger at the faint nylon thread wound tight around his neck. Seam. Something about it made my stomach twist. I snapped a photo, saved it next to my notes, and stood by the window watching the fog swallow the road. I'd lived long enough to know silence can be dangerous. But this was something else. I didn't know if I should call the police yet or first find proof that would make them believe me. All I knew was that a 5-year-old's whisper had just cracked my world open. The next morning, I drove Micah to Cedar Meadow Preschool. He was unusually quiet in the back seat, tracing his finger along Ranger's worn fabric. I told him I'd pick him up early, but he didn't answer. His eyes followed the passing trees like they were hiding something only he could see. After dropping him off, I asked to speak privately with his teacher, Ms. Harper Kincaid. She welcomed me into the art room, sunlight cutting through the tall windows, dust floating in the beams. "Micah's been distant lately," she said before I could start. "Has something happened at home?" I hesitated, then told her carefully what Micah had said that morning, omitting the word basement. Her expression shifted. Brows furrowed, then she reached for a thick folder from the shelf. "I think you should see this." It was a stack of Micah's drawings from the last 3 weeks. The first few were scribbles, normal, messy. But then came the others, dark, heavy streaks of black crayon covering every inch of the paper. In most, a small figure stood in a cornered room behind vertical lines like bars. In 3 of them, a taller shape loomed at the doorway, drawn with dark brown wax, face blank. My stomach clenched. Miss Kincaid pointed to one sketch where Micah had scrawled 3 jagged letters, near the bottom SGF. "He repeats that a lot," she said. I asked him what it meant, but he just said it was a secret word. I took a picture of the page with my phone, pretending my hands weren't shaking. "He startles easily," she continued. "Whenever the door closes too hard, he hides under the art table. And he refuses to play in the ball pit, says it's too dark. Yesterday, during nap time, he kept whispering to his bear. I couldn't hear the words. I pressed my palm to the cool edge of the table, steadying myself. Please keep observing him, I said softly. Let him draw whatever he wants, but don't press him about home. He's scared. When we stepped back into the hallway, I reached down to zip Micah's jacket and saw faint red marks around his wrist, thin, circular, as if from something that had gripped too tight. I took another quick photo, pretending to fix his sleeve. He looked up at me, eyes glazed with that same quiet plea I'd seen in his mother. On the way out, I told Miss Kincaid I'd keep her updated, thanked her, and walked toward the parking lot. The air smelled like rain, metallic and sharp. I was halfway to the car when I saw a folded piece of paper tucked beneath my windshield wiper. The handwriting was rushed uneven in black marker, "Mind your own business." My chest tightened. I looked around, no one. The street was empty except for the wind rustling the playground flags. I slid the note into the folder with Micah's drawings and got into the car. When I turned the key, my reflection in the rearview mirror looked older than I remembered. I told myself it was grief, paranoia, maybe exhaustion. But deep down, I knew someone was watching. And whatever secret lived inside that basement, it didn't want me anywhere near it. The night had stretched into a week of uneasy silence. Each evening I found myself staring through the window at the faint glow of Taryn's house, down the slope, waiting for something to make sense. That afternoon I walked to Arthur Pike's porch. He was trimming his hedges, the same old pipe hanging from his mouth. When I told him what Micah had whispered and what the teacher had shown me, Arthur frowned. "You might not be wrong," he said quietly. 5, maybe 7 nights ago I saw Taryn with another kid, a boy smaller than Micah. She was leading him into the house around 1 a.m. His words froze me. "You're sure it wasn't Micah?" I asked. Arthur shook his head. "Micah's taller. This boy was holding his arm funny, like it hurt. I remember because my old clock had just struck 1. I thought it was odd, but I kept my mouth shut. I asked him to come with me to the grocery at the corner Silver Pine Market. The owner, Mrs. Clayton, had an outdoor camera above the door. Arthur was a long-time customer and promised to ask his nephew who handled the system to check the footage. If it's still stored, he said, we'll have something solid. By the time I left his porch, the evening wind had picked up scattering, dry pine needles across the gravel. I walked home with my heart pounding. The next morning, I decided to report everything properly, no matter how foolish it made me look. At the precinct, Lieutenant Cole Ramirez sat behind a cluttered desk, his expression polite but weary. I laid out every detail, the drawings, the marks on Micah's wrists, the threatening note, Arthur's account. He listened, tapping a pen against the desk. When I finished, he sighed. "Mrs. Quaid, I understand your concern, but there isn't enough probable cause for a search warrant. Kids say things. Sometimes they imagine things when a parent works nights. I'll file your report and we'll monitor it." Monitor it? I repeated, disbelief rising in my throat. What if a child is locked in that basement right now? He met my eyes, unmoved. If we had physical evidence, it'd be different. For now, please don't confront your daughter-in-law. That could make things worse. I left feeling hollow. The sun outside felt colder than the fluorescent lights inside. I sat in the car staring at the steering wheel, knowing that waiting could mean danger for someone. I opened my phone, updated my notes with every word of the conversation, time-stamped it. My faith in the system had cracked, but not my resolve. Later that afternoon at the Silver Pine Market, I heard raised voices near the vegetable stall. Kellen Whitlock Tarrant's older brother stood there red-faced, talking loud enough for the whole market to hear. "You need to stop spreading lies about my sister," he shouted when he saw me. "You're trying to take Micah away because you can't handle losing your son. Everyone knows you've been unstable since Noel died." Heads turned. Some people shook theirs, others whispered. My cheeks burned, but I forced myself to stay calm. "I only want to protect my grandson," I said, "and any child who needs help." He sneered and walked off, muttering something about crazy old women. Around me, people avoided my eyes. A woman I'd known for years turned away, pretending to rearrange her apples. I left my groceries on the counter and walked out. The gossip had started to spread like smoke through dry grass, and I could already feel it choking me. That night, the phone rang. It was Arthur. "My nephew can pull the footage tomorrow," he said. "You should come by in the morning." His voice was low, cautious. "Be careful tonight. Some folks around here talk too much." After hanging up, I opened the file on my phone. I scrolled through every photo, Micah's wrists, Ranger's neck, seemed the crumpled note, the sketch with the initials SGF. I arranged them chronologically, the patterns starting to form like pieces of a terrible puzzle. Outside, a single light flickered at Taryn's house, then vanished. The night went quiet except for the wind through the trees. I whispered into the dark, "Tomorrow I'll have proof." Arthur was already waiting on his porch. When I arrived the next morning, the air was cold enough to sting. He handed me a small flash drive. Footage from the night I mentioned, he said. "Quality's bad, but it's something." Inside his kitchen, we watched on his laptop. The timestamp read 12:47 a.m. The camera caught Taryn's figure walking quickly down the sidewalk, a small child beside her in light blue pajamas. The child's arm was wrapped in white cloth. They disappeared toward her house. The image was grainy, but the sight of it sent a chill through me. "Breathe," Arthur murmured. "Take this to the police, but let them handle it the right way." At 9, I was back at the precinct, the flash drive trembling in my hand. Lenta Ramirez watched the footage, squinting. "Hard to tell," he said. "Could be a neighbor's kid, or maybe a visiting cousin." "You said this was at night, almost 1 a.m., I replied, "and that matches what my grandson described." He closed the file and slid the drive across the desk. "I'm sorry. This doesn't justify a warrant. It's too unclear. And Mrs. Quaid, if you keep investigating on your own, you could be accused of harassment. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. So I'm supposed to do nothing, I whispered. Just wait until another child vanishes. He didn't answer. His silence was the sound of a locked door. I picked up the flash drive and walked out. By noon, I sat in the back corner of Clover Cafe trying to steady my hands with a cup of coffee. The bell over the door chimed, and when I looked up, I saw a man at a far table lift his phone toward me. The faint click of a camera app made my pulse quicken. When I stood to confront him, he turned away and left the door swinging shut behind him. On the table where he'd been a folded newspaper lay open. The headline made my stomach drop. Widow Quaid accuses daughter-in-law of kidnapping. Concern or delusion? Beneath it, a photo of me from last year's memorial service for Noel. The article quoted Kellen saying I had lost touch with reality since my son's death. 2 other neighbors had added that I often talked to myself. The smear was complete. I crumpled the paper, shoved it into my bag, and left. The eyes that followed me on the street weren't curious anymore. They were pitying. I drove home in silence, gripping the wheel until my knuckles ached. That evening, the phone rang. Taryn's number. For a second, relief washed through me. Maybe she'd explain. Maybe she'd tell me I was wrong. But her voice was trembling, clipped. "Mom, please stop. I know you've been talking to people. You don't understand what you're doing. Just stop before someone gets hurt." "Taryn," I said, "what are you afraid of?" She didn't answer. There was a faint noise on the line, sobbing small and high like a child's cry. It wasn't Micah. Then the call cut off. I stood there holding the phone, the dial tone buzzing in my ear, every muscle in my body locked. Somewhere, a child was crying in the dark, and my family's name was being dragged through the mud to keep that silence intact. I walked to the desk, plugged in the flash drive, and copied every file to a hidden folder. I recorded a voice note time-stamping everything again. If the law wouldn't move, I would build the truth myself. Outside, the sky over Silver Pine turned to slate snow beginning to fall. The streetlights flickered one by one, casting long shadows across the road. I closed the curtains and whispered to myself, "No more silence. Not again." That night, as the wind howled through the eaves, I began the list, names, times, places, every thread leading back to that house at the bottom of the hill. It wasn't just a mother's fear anymore. It was a promise. By late afternoon, the light over Silver Pine dimmed into a dull orange. The road down to Taryn's house curved like a scar through the slope, half hidden beneath a row of tall pines. I packed a small box of Micah's toys and excused something innocent to justify my visit and started walking. The closer I got, the colder the air felt. Taryn's car wasn't in the driveway. Her curtains were drawn tight. I knocked softly. No answer. I tried again, then pressed my ear to the door. From inside came a faint clatter metal against metal, followed by what sounded like a quick intake of breath, panicked shallow. My pulse jumped. I called her name once, waited, then stepped off the porch and circled toward the back. There behind the house, half buried under a sheet of frost and mud, was a small iron door set into the ground. The lock was new, fresh paint, no rust, still smelling of oil. I crouched, snapped a photo, zoomed in on the keyhole, and backed away before I could lose my nerve. As I turned to leave, I caught a glimpse of headlights winding up the hill Taryn's car. My stomach dropped. I hurried to the trees, watching her pull in, slam the car door, and stand still for a moment, as if listening to something beneath her feet. Then she went inside. The lights in her kitchen flickered twice, then steadied. I left quietly, heart hammering. That night, I sat at my desk writing everything down. Time sounds the color of the lock, the way the metal door sat lower than the ground, like it led somewhere deeper. I uploaded the photo, ready to take it to the police in the morning. But just after midnight, the sharp crash of glass shattered my thoughts. Someone had thrown a rock through my front window. It landed near the fireplace, wrapped in paper. When I unrolled it, the words were scrawled in black ink, "Stop digging." I froze. The house felt suddenly too quiet. I turned off the lamp and peered outside, but the street was empty, the snow unmarked except for a single set of tire tracks heading downhill. I locked every door checked on Micah. He was asleep. Ranger clutched to his chest and sat in the dark until my heartbeat slowed. The next morning, Arthur came by, his face pale. "Saw a black pickup parked near Taryn's place again last night," he said. "License plates covered with tape. Been there a few times this week." I showed him the rock and the note. He frowned. "You need to be careful, Marceline. Whoever this is, they know you're close." Later that day, I went over the photo I'd taken of the lock. Something caught my eye, a dark smear near the edge of the handle. I enlarged the image. It wasn't dirt, it was dried blood. I saved the zoomed version in a new folder, labeled it with the date, and felt a cold determination take hold of me. That night, I woke to the sound of soft footsteps. When I opened my eyes, Micah was standing in the doorway, eyes half open, murmuring. He said he can't breathe. His voice was distant, dreamlike. I rushed over, shook him gently until he blinked awake, confused and trembling. I held him close until he drifted back to sleep. Morning light crept through the curtains. I went to make cocoa, trying to calm the pounding in my chest. That's when I noticed Ranger sitting on the table. Someone or something had cut a slit under the bear's neck seam. I pulled the stuffing aside carefully and found a small folded paper tucked inside. On it were 3 letters written in faint black ink, SGF, the same initials from Micah's drawings, the same ones I'd seen scratched at the bottom corner of that basement door photo. I slipped the note into an envelope and hid it in my purse. No one could know, not yet. By the time the sun rose higher, my fear had shifted into something sharper. I wasn't just a grieving mother anymore. I was someone who'd finally remembered how to fight. Snow fell heavy over Silver Pine that morning, turning the whole town into a ghostly blur. From my window, the pines looked like rows of pale sentinels, standing guard over secrets they'd rather not share. The phone rang just after 8. It was Arthur. "My nephew found more footage," he said. "You need to see this." I drove through the slush to his house, the heater barely cutting the cold. The new clip showed the same black truck parked beside Taryn's house 2 nights after the first video. A man stepped out tall, wearing a dark jacket with a faded emblem across the back. 3 letters curved into a circle, Sable Gate Fellowship. The same letters as on the paper from Ranger's neck. My hands trembled as I watched. "Arthur," I said quietly, "that's what the letters mean. It's a group, maybe a cult. I've read about them years ago, something in the mountains, children rituals." He nodded grimly. "If that's true, you need to tell Ramirez." I did. By 10, I was back in the precinct, spreading photos, notes, the printed frame of the man's jacket across his desk. Ramirez listened longer this time. He looked at the evidence, the timestamps, then exhaled. "All right. I'll request a warrant, but it'll take the prosecutor's approval. We need to be thorough. I said, voice breaking. "If you wait, a child might die." He looked away, jaw tight. "I'll do what I can today." By noon, I drove home through the thickening snow, nerves stretched thin. The phone rang again, Juniper Malloy, my oldest friend. Her voice trembled. "Marceline, I saw Micah. A woman picked him up from school today. Not you, not Taryn." I felt the world tilt. "What woman?" I gasped. "Describe her." But Juniper said the woman wore sunglasses, hood up, moved fast. The teachers assumed she was a relative. I hung up and called the police. Dispatch promised to send someone to check, but before they could act, another call came in. Taryn was missing. Her phone went straight to voicemail. Panic and fury collided inside me. I gathered every photo, every file, and waited. The snow outside muffled the whole town as if the world itself was holding its breath. By late afternoon, my phone buzzed again. An unknown number, Mrs. Quaid. A male voice said low and calm, "If you want to see your grandson again, you'll stop talking to the police. Do you understand?" My throat went dry. "Who is this? You know who we are," he said, then hung up. The line went dead, leaving only the hum of the storm outside. I sat frozen for a long time. Then I opened my drawer and took out the envelope with the SGF note. I traced the letters with my fingertip, whispering, "You won't win." By nightfall, snow had buried the porch steps. The power flickered once, twice, then steadied. I was about to check the locks when a faint knock echoed through the wind. I hesitated, then opened the door. Taryn stood there, soaked to the bone hair plastered to her face. Her lips were blue eyes wide with terror. "Marceline," she gasped, voice hoarse, "they took Micah. They took him." I tried to stop them, but I couldn't. Her knees buckled and she collapsed into my arms. I shouted for help. Arthur, hearing the noise, came running from next door. We wrapped her in blankets, called an ambulance. When the medics arrived, I followed them out, the snow swallowing our footprints. At the hospital, they found a small metal key in her coat pocket, stained dark, with what looked like dried blood. I held it in my hand, cold and heavy, and knew exactly what it was, the key to that iron door beneath her house. Back home, the storm howled against the windows. I stood by the glass, watching the snow erase every trace of the road below. Somewhere under that frozen ground was the truth waiting. I whispered to the night, "I won't stop this time. No more children will vanish into the dark." And as the wind carried my words through the pines, I made myself a silent promise. Whatever waited beneath that hill, I would bring it into the light. The night after Taryn collapsed, I didn't sleep. I sat in the sterile corridor of Silver Pine General, watching her through the glass wall of her hospital room. She tossed in fevered dreams, muttering the same words over and over. They took him to the dark place. Every syllable tightened something inside me. When Latine Ramirez arrived with his notepad and the blood-stained key they'd found in her coat, I confirmed what I already knew. "It matches the lock on her back door," I said. His jaw set. For the first time, he didn't argue. By dawn, the sky had turned pale silver, the snow glowing faintly beneath the trees. Ramirez called the district prosecutor and after an hour of tense waiting, emerged from his office with the signed warrant. "We go in now," he said. The drive down to the bottom of Silver Pine Road felt endless. The convoy of police cruisers cut through the white haze lights flashing faintly against the snow. Arthur Pike rode with me, hands clenched around his thermos, the silence between us heavy. When we reached Taryn's house, everything looked eerily still. The windows were iced over the path, unshoveled. Inside, the air was stale and cold. Tables, overturned drawers, half open, a trail of footprints leading from the kitchen to the back door. Ramirez motioned to the team. "Basement," he said. I followed them out back to the small iron door set into the earth. It looked smaller than I remembered, its edges frosted white. He inserted the key. The metal groaned as the lock turned, echoing through the quiet morning. The door swung open with a shudder. Damp air poured out, smelling of soil and something old, something that had been hidden too long. We climbed down the narrow steps, flashlights slicing through the dark. The room below was empty. The walls were covered in childlike drawings, black figures, barred windows, a stick figure reaching for a sun. In one corner lay a torn blue jacket sleeve, ripped at the elbow. I knelt beside it, fingers tracing the fabric. It was the same jacket from the video. Over here, one of the officers called. He held up a small wooden box. Inside, they found an ID card with the name Rowan Pierce. My breath caught. I remembered that name from the missing persons flyers years ago. Arthur whispered a prayer. Ramirez's flashlight swept across the far wall, illuminating more writing. Scrawled in a child's uneven hand, he said he wants to see the sun. On a dusty shelf nearby were folders bound in string. The labels bore the symbol I now knew too well, SGF. We opened them carefully. Inside were photographs of children, lists of names, and chilling notes labeled redeemed. My heart froze when I saw one of the photos. Micah's face stared back at me, eyes bright, smile forced. Ramirez didn't speak for several seconds. Then, into his radio, He ordered the team to search for additional access points. It didn't take long to find another hatch behind a stack of crates. A narrow tunnel descended deeper into the hill, lined with old mining supports. We followed it, boots crunching on gravel. The air grew colder, wetter. Then a shout came from ahead. We found them. 2 paramedics rushed forward as officers carried out 2 small figures wrapped in blankets. Rowan Pierce, alive but skeletal, clung to the shoulder of a young officer. Behind him, another carried Micah, pale, but breathing, his tiny hand clutching Ranger's ear. I stumbled toward them, tears spilling hot against my frozen cheeks. "Grandma," he whispered, voice raw. "I told you about the boy." I nodded, unable to speak, brushing the hair from his forehead as paramedics took him to the ambulance. Above us, the sound of helicopter blades tore through the mountain air, scattering the snow. Ramirez turned to me, his expression softer than I had ever seen. "You were right all along," he said quietly. As the children were lifted into the light, the first rays of the sun broke through the clouds. The snow caught the glow, turning silver and gold. For the first time in months, Silver Pine felt alive again. When Taryn finally opened her eyes, the world outside her window was melting. Snow slid from the roof in slow sheets, the air warm enough to carry the scent of pine resin. I sat beside her hospital bed, watching her breathe, waiting for the truth. She turned her head toward me, eyes glassy with exhaustion and shame. "I didn't mean for any of this," she whispered. "After Noel died, I couldn't breathe. I was angry at everyone, at God, at you, at myself." Then Caspian came. He said he could fix it, said the children could be cleansed of the sins of their parents. Her voice cracked. He made me believe Micah needed saving, that if I didn't follow, something worse would happen to him. She told me how Caspian Rook, the leader of the Sable Gate Fellowship, had found her in a grief group, how he promised peace, forgiveness, and belonging, how he'd convinced her to watch over a child named Rowan, calling it a test of faith. When she tried to leave, they threatened Micah. She'd hidden him with me, hoping I would protect him, and left clues she couldn't risk explaining. I thought they'd let him go once they had another, she said through tears. I was wrong. The door opened, and Ramirez stepped in, coat dusted with snow. "They've arrested Caspian," he said. "We found him at the old mine site with everything, records, photos, names. It's over." For a long moment, none of us spoke. The only sound was the steady beep of the heart monitor. I looked at Taryn and saw not a villain, but a woman broken by fear and guilt. "You were wrong," I said softly, "but you tried to save him in your own way. That still matters." She nodded, tears streaming silently. Later that day, I visited the pediatric wing. Micah was sitting up in bed, color returning to his cheeks. Rowan sat beside him, a nurse gently combing his matted hair. The 2 boys shared a blanket, heads bent over a small puzzle. When Micah saw me, he smiled. "Grandma, it's not dark anymore." The press conference took place that afternoon. Cameras lined the back of the hospital auditorium, reporters murmuring as Ramirez approached the podium. Today, he said, thanks to the persistence of one woman, 2 children are alive. Mrs. Marceline Quaid refused to stay silent when the rest of us doubted her. His words echoed through the hall. I felt the weight of every stare, but for once, I didn't shrink from it. Afterward, Ramirez handed me an envelope. Inside were the reopened files of Noel's accident. The report now listed possible coercion and linked to Sable Gate Fellowship. My son hadn't just died in a crash. He had been trying to expose them. The truth I'd been chasing had been buried with him all along. Weeks passed. Snow melted into streams that carved through the woods, and the air filled with the sound of running water. Life crept back into Silver Pine. One afternoon, I found a letter tucked inside Taryn's hospital discharge papers. It was addressed to me, written in her unsteady hand. I knew about Noel. I was too scared to tell you. I thought silence would protect us, but it only made everything worse. Please forgive me for what I did and what I couldn't do. I folded the letter and placed it beside Noel's photograph on the mantel. Forgiveness wasn't simple, but it was a start. A month later, I stood at my kitchen window watching Micah and Rowan chase each other across the thawing yard. Ranger, freshly sown, sat on the porch rail, his patch seam barely visible. The air smelled like rain and wood smoke. I opened my journal, the one where it all began, and wrote the last line. One whisper can move the world if the person who hears it is brave enough to believe. As the church bell rang from down the hill, sunlight filtered through the branches, turning the pines a soft gold. For the first time in a long time, I felt peace, not because the world was safe, but because I had finally learned that light only matters when someone dares to follow it.